Hello again. Welcome back to RP-0 America. So you can see something on the pad there, but it is not my attempt at landing something on the moon. No, you can see it's actually very different from that. I'm waiting on a technology which will give me a number of parts, like Titan II parts and 3 light Agena engines, which would make it actually feasible for me to land something on the moon that isn't a ridiculous gong show. But yeah, that's kind of my recommended tech for that. So I've constructed and set up a Mercury-Atlas 1 craft. That's what I've called it. In practice, I'd call it the, I'm not sure exactly what it's the equivalent of, because it is a non-crewed capsule. I have skipped all of the Redstone Mercury flights for a number of reasons I'll discuss. But I am going to do a one uncrewed Mercury-Atlas test, just to further increase the effectiveness of my Atlas rocket, because once in a while it fails, and during a crewed Mercury flight, I would definitely like that not to happen. So in practice, before a flight like this, even an uncrewed, I intend to place this in orbit. Before this was even done, and I'm going to do it by script to free up my brain for talking. All right, just going to load up my general launch for script. This may be the first time I've used one of my switch to 0. One of my own launch scripts in this series, but if you look on my YouTube, yes, I kind of show and share this script and my previous scripts, and I'm going to continue developing more because I want to make the perfect generalist script, ultimately for rendezvousing, launching from the ground to a rendezvous with another craft in orbit, but I also want it to be non-specialized to the craft that I'm launching. So I've switched to 0, run launch 4.ks, and it's derived from a script that Bevo LJ was nice enough to share. If you check out his YouTube channel, and I just completely overhauled it. But really, that's what I started from, because I learned better personally, like a new language and process syntax, just having something that basically works to start. Anyway, so this will be an uncrewed capsule placed into orbit. One thing I need to shift is where this the launch escape tower is jettisoned. I really didn't pay too much attention to the staging of things beforehand. That launch is automatic. Every other staging that will happen will be manual by me. So I also need to remember to turn the script off once we get to orbit. So anyway, before this was carried out, the Mercury was the very first crewed capsule built and flown by America. And so understandably they needed to develop it and perfect it before they actually sent up a human crew. So they did many test flights and many non-flights with all kinds of things, mostly Redstone Mercury, but also I think Little Joe, and I think this might be equivalent to Big Joe, I'm not sure, which was there were uncrewed tests of the capsule. So Little Joe or things like that were just like a quick launch with solids so they could test the escape system here, which I have set up, so I may show that off at some other point. But really, it's just if I hit backspace now, this would light, all these engines would shut down, and we would jettison off. We would leave the rocket. So because something could actually fail when I do a crewed mission, I do want a legitimate escape system on my rockets, because that's part of the excitement and fun of test flight, is that a rocket could legitimately fail when you have a crew. Also part of the rationale for flying like this. So before this, tons of tests were done. So they had to develop the capsule, make sure it could withstand the pressures of launch, test the life support systems, the computer control, and transmission back down to the ground, etc. And the Redstone Mercury, so a small Redstone, was an intermediate range ballistic missile, very similar to the Juno 1 rocket that I flew. I think Jupiter might be similar, but it's kind of a weird spot in history where there's lots of names for very similar rockets, just used for different things or controlled by different agencies. Getting close to where I want to drop the ring now. Anyway, so the Redstone is very much like the Juno 1 I used to put the Explorer into orbit. And now getting there. And that was used to, before it was actually used to send humans, the first Americans, into space, not into orbit in space, but still into space in a suborbital flight. I believe primate crew, I'm trying to remember the right word, monkey versus ape versus primate, there are differences. I just don't know them off by memory. And at this point, we're moving too fast, fast enough that the this system wouldn't really be all that useful necessarily, so we're just going to get rid of the tower, just jettison it on its own. That's because we're moving so fast that we would just shut down the engine and separate. We're not in danger of the atmosphere ripping us apart if something goes bad. So many Redstone flights were done, including with non-human crews. And a number of tests of that process were done, and then eventually they flew 2 Mercury Redstone flights, where humans were placed up to the orbit, to an altitude above 100 kilometers, to 180 kilometers, I think, 180 kilometers, around 100 miles, which was edge of space, and then they successfully came back down. So they were very briefly in space during about a 15-minute flight. After that, at the time, the reason they used the Redstone for flights like that was to test out and develop the hardware, because it was a reliable rocket at the time, quite reliable at the time of the development of the Mercury program, because the Atlas had not by any means been perfected, was not nearly as reliable at the time as the Redstone, and also Redstone's smaller, so it was cheaper. And so they used that for a number of test flights, and then they started, and then they did a few flights with the Atlas and the Mercury. I believe they did at least one that was suborbital that didn't completely go to orbit, obviously not crewed, and another test flight, I think, which is what I have here. I think it might have been called Big Joe, where they did use the Atlas to place a capsule in orbit and kind of go through the whole test just without the risk of having a crew member on board. And so that was quite an accomplishment for the program. So part of the rationale of doing the Redstone Mercury and the Atlas program, kind of developing them in tandem and flying the Redstone Mercuries, was, like I said, the Atlas wasn't perfected and not really completely developed at the time of this program. Like some of those, like the Pioneer missions, used an Atlas C, which wasn't even this final developed version of the Atlas, which is the Atlas D, such as what we're using here. Just because there wasn't enough availability of the Atlas D rocket. They were just still in development, and once they had completed the design and were rolling them out, they were America's first intercontinental ballistic missile. The Titan I was developed alongside it, just in case the Atlas never was able to succeed, but that was never used for, in practice, that was never used for any human missions or space launches of any kind that I'm aware of, the Titan I. So once this is complete, they can't place a huge payload into orbit with an Atlas vehicle. Once everything's done, once we're in orbit very shortly, the Mercury capsule, return equipment, and retro pack are about a ton and a half, which is very light if you compare it to what the Soviets built for their first, and all their capsules and hardware, just because their rockets were heavier and everything. But still, this is a massive accomplishment at the time for America, being able to, there we go, being able to place something in orbit. So all together, come on, shut down. I want to shut down the computer program. There we go. And then separate the rocket from the capsule. So part of the reason I didn't do those other flights of the Redstone and the Redstone Mercury is because a lot of the systems in reality that they were testing out during that don't actually currently have failure profiles for test flight. That doesn't mean they couldn't be done. If somebody was interested enough, Shadow X's developed kind of the function for them to fail. Somebody just needs to do experiments and kind of determine what is a fun and challenging failure rate. Like right now at this point, everything's in orbit, everything looks great. If we had a crew, and this could fail, right? That vehicle could fail to separate from the capsule. That could happen. Many different types of failure could absolutely happen during one of these missions. Here, let me just kill this roll or tumble or whatever. And I can close the KOS window. So all kinds of systems that could fail in reality and that they were actually testing with many of those missions just are not currently set up to fail with the realism overhaul. Like I said, if anybody's interested, they could definitely go about configuring those all those types of failures that Shadow X is working out. For example, the reason that this is built this way, it's got 3 nozzles, because they're 3 independent solid rockets. And if one of the 3 happened to fail, there'd still be sufficient, it'd still kind of slow down the capsule enough to have it return to Earth. If 2 failed, perhaps it wouldn't be enough, but at least it may lower it enough that the atmosphere could bring it down. There's still a small chance of success, but the point is all of these various things could fail, right? This could fail to decouple. That's another failure mode. There's just all kinds of failure modes that could happen in reality, that could be added to realism overhaul even through various test flight failures. It simply haven't been set up yet, just because there's no, we don't have the time, the current volunteers don't have the time, but if anybody's interested in doing it, we'd be more than happy to help them out and show them the ropes, and they could volunteer to tune and config those. Yeah, so we're able to place this in orbit. I think that's sufficient. Let me just quickly go through my notes. So this only was able to stay in orbit for a day or 2, which is many, many orbits, because each orbit is 90 minutes. So you can get a pretty good count of orbits. As you can see from the batteries here, though, they just don't last for very long in orbit. Let's see. I was trying to remember which key could switch me to viewing inside the capsule and out of it, but I don't recall it. That's okay. I mean, it would be kind of a little dizzying anyway, because it's still rolling a bit. I believe that's called a roll. I am very much not an airplanes guy, so I don't know those terms very well. There we go. Stop it from rolling, and we even left the window pointed down, so if there was a crew, they could be looking at the ocean as we pass between North America and Africa, which will be coming up shortly. So it's a short trip to orbit, but it's a pretty small payload. But it's still a major accomplishment. It's the beginning of America really starting to catch up on the human space flight side of things, when they're able to place a Mercury capsule with crew in orbit for a number of orbits and then return them successfully. Let's see. All right, so I think that's sufficient. So I'm just going to end that here, because shorter videos tend to be better if I can get them out like that, and then I will bring the capsule back down in another video, just because I can. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.